Diamond Bradley was 3 years old. She could not read. She could not navigate her neighborhood. She could not protect herself. And yet, on July 6, 2001, Diamond disappeared from her home in Chicago without a single confirmed sighting beyond her apartment building. That should be impossible. Children this young do not vanish on their own. What happened to Diamond required circumstance, silence, or intervention by someone else. She could not understand danger. She could not decide where to go or how to return home. Everything about her safety depended on someone else. Some missing child cases unfold with noise, sirens, press conferences, faces repeated on television screens. Others begin quietly, so quietly that by the time anyone realizes something is wrong, the moment to intervene is already gone. This was one of those cases. Diamond didn't disappear alone. She vanished with her older sister, Tionda Bradley, who was 10 years old at the time. More than 2 decades later, Diamond has never been found. And the most unsettling question in this case is not only what happened, it is how a child this young could disappear and leave behind so little trace. This is not a story driven by spectacle or theory. This is the story about vulnerability, responsibility, and silence. This is an Ebony case. Diamond Yvette Bradley was 3 years old. At that age, a child does not leave behind a personal record. They do not write letters. They do not explain their thoughts. They do not preserve memories for the world to revisit later. A toddler's life exists almost entirely through the memories and documentation of others. This is one of the quiet tragedies of this case. There are no preserved interviews describing Diamond's personality, no teachers to quote, no classmates old enough to remember her voice or her mannerisms. Not because Diamond lacked personality, but because she was so young, and because no one could have known that her life would need to be preserved in this way. What we know is limited, factual, and painfully small. Diamond lived with her family on the south side of Chicago. She depended entirely on adults and older children for safety, guidance, and care. She could not navigate her neighborhood on her own. She could not advocate for herself. Whatever happened to Diamond happened within a world structured by adults. That is not an accusation. It is a reality of childhood. Diamond's story cannot be told without her sister. Tionda Bradley was 10 years old enough to walk independently, old enough to follow instructions, old enough to be trusted with responsibility for short periods of time. Diamond was not. This difference matters. Tionda may have understood where she was going. Diamond would have followed. Tionda may have known familiar routes. Diamond relied entirely on her. Whatever happened that day affected both girls, but Diamond's vulnerability makes her disappearance equally devastating. She did not choose to leave. She could not protect herself. She could not explain what happened next. At the time of the disappearance, Diamond and Tionda were living with their mother. Public reporting identifies their mother as Tracy Bradley, the primary caregiver and the adult responsible for the girls on the morning they vanished. There is limited public information about the children's father or fathers. Law enforcement has not released extensive details about the extended family dynamics, custody arrangements, or disputes. That absence matters. In many missing children's cases, family history becomes the center of speculation. In this case, authorities have largely kept the focus on the disappearance itself. What is documented is that Tracy Bradley briefly left the apartment that morning. In isolation, that detail can sound alarming. In context, it reflects a routine familiar to many working-class households, where errands are close, time away is short, and older children are often trusted with limited responsibility. Tionda was 10 years old. She was considered old enough to watch her sister briefly, What failed that day was not an extraordinary decision. It was the assumption that everyday trust would remain safe. Before leaving the apartment on the morning of July 6, 2001, Tionda Bradley wrote a note. The note said that she and her sister were going to the store and that they intended to come back. That detail matters. This was not a message written in panic. It wasn't a goodbye. It was not an explanation for running away. It was a child doing what she understood she was supposed to do. A 10-year-old Tionda knew that leaving without explanation would worry her mother. Writing the note was her way of accounting for herself, of saying, "This is where we're going. This is why we're gone. We'll be back." Diamond followed her sister. A 3-year-old Diamond did not understand the meaning of the note. She did not know that this piece of paper would become one of the last tangible records connected to her intentions that day. The note has never been publicly released verbatim. No photograph has been shared. What we know comes from the law enforcement summaries and media reporting that consistently describe its contents the same way. They were going to the store. They were coming back. And they never did. At the time of their disappearance, Diamond and Tionda were living with their mother in a South Side Chicago apartment. Public records do not indicate ongoing custody disputes. There is no documentation of prior child welfare intervention connected to the case that has been released publicly. There are no confirmed reports of abuse or neglect. What is documented is that Tracy Bradley briefly left the apartment that morning. Again, taken alone, that detail can sound alarming. Placed in context, it reflects how many families function, especially in urban environments where errands are nearby and time away is measured in minutes, not hours. Tionda was trusted to watch her sister briefly. What failed that day was not neglect. It was the assumption that routine safety would hold. The Bradley sisters lived in a dense residential area on Chicago's South Side. This was not an isolated neighborhood. There were other apartments nearby. There were sidewalks, streets, and regular foot traffic. Chicago is a city of millions, a place where movement blends quickly into anonymity.
In the shadow of the buildings where the girls once played, at 35th and Lake Park Avenue in the Bronzeville neighborhood. Aunt April Jackson, Uncle Troy Gaston, great-aunt Shalia Bradley Smith, and cousin Candace Jones.
It's hard to deal with life knowing that you have loved ones out there and you have no idea what they are.
Diamond was just 3 years old, her sister Tionda 10, when they disappeared the morning of July 6, 2001.
In environments like this, people see children outside every day. A 10-year-old walking with their younger sibling would not automatically raise concern. A toddler following an older sister would not stand out. Crowds do not guarantee witnesses. Density does not guarantee protection. People assume someone else knows the child. Someone else is watching. Someone else will step in if something is wrong. That assumption creates gaps, and gaps are where children disappear. When Tracy Bradley returned to the apartment and the girls were not there, concern escalated quickly. This was not a situation where the days passed unnoticed, minutes stretched, then hours. The girls did not return. Police were contacted. The shift from routine emergency happened fast. 2 children were missing. One of them was 3 years old. That fact alone elevated the urgency of the response. Chicago police responded and began searching the surrounding areas. Officers went door to door. They checked nearby buildings. They searched stairwells, alleys, and common areas. Neighbors were questioned. But there was no confirmed sighting that gave investigators a clear direction. No one could say with certainty where the girls went after leaving the apartment. No one reported seeing them enter a vehicle. No clear interruption was witnessed. Hours turned into days. the scope of the search expanded.
Their disappearance sparked a massive search.
Police department.
Hundreds of Chicago police, federal law enforcement officers, and civilian volunteers spent days checking sewers, lagoons, abandoned buildings, and factories.
Federal resources were brought in. The FBI became involved. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children issued alerts and distributed posters. These actions acknowledged the seriousness of the situation, especially Diamond's age. But even an extensive search has limits when there is no starting point. No last confirmed sighting, no physical evidence, no surveillance footage. For Diamond, each search was especially heartbreaking. A 3-year-old could not explain fear. She cannot describe who she trusted. She cannot say where she was taken, if she was taken at all. Everything investigators could learn depended on someone else having seen something and saying something, and that never happened. It is important to say this with clarity. Tionda Bradley did not disappear instead of Diamond. She disappeared with her. She was 10 years old enough to write a note, old enough to feel responsibility, old enough to be expected to return safely. She never did. Tionda's responsibility that morning did not come from maturity. It came from expectation. She was still a child. Whatever happened ended her childhood that day as well. And whatever happened to Diamond happened under circumstances shaped by the same silence. Without a verified last sighting beyond the apartment building, every possible route became a hypothesis. The store mentioned in the note was considered. Surrounding blocks were revisited. Transit corridors were evaluated. But nothing tied Diamond and Tionda to a specific place after they left home. When investigators know where a child was last seen, time can be traced backward and forward. In this case, there was no such sequence. Instead, the investigation relied on canvassing and recanvassing, asking neighbors the same questions, hoping memories would sharpen with reflection. But memory tends to blur over time, not sharpen. For Diamond, the case increasingly depended on indirect evidence, patterns, probabilities, and absence. With federal involvement, Diamond's name entered national missing children systems. Posters circulated beyond Chicago. Tips were solicited. These systems are designed to widen the net, to make sure a missing child's face reaches as many eyes as possible. But they rely on one thing above all else: recognition. Someone has to see the child and know she is missing. Someone has to remember a moment that felt unusual at the time. In Diamond's case, no such recognition produced a verifiable lead. Age-progressed images were later created.
Anybody who heard about this case has not forgotten it.
Angeline Hartman of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children says they continue to get calls and tips after releasing these age progression photos 5 years ago.
Sometimes people think the longer a case goes on, the less likely it is that we might find these children, but that's not the case. We've seen it over and over again. Long-term missing children are found.
They remind us of how much time has passed, but they cannot confirm survival. They keep hope alive. They do not provide answers. Public information about the family's private grief is limited, and appropriately so. There are no extensive interviews mapping every year of waiting, but waiting without answers has weight. Every year without confirmation extends uncertainty. There is no marker, no resolution, no place to grieve. This is not closure. It is suspension.
Wait in limbo like this. Nobody said nothing. Nobody's prosecuted. Nobody's in jail. But the girls are still gone.
As years passed, coverage of the case became sporadic. Occasional mentions surfaced, often tied to anniversaries or renewed appeals.
Today marks 24 years since the Bradley sisters disappeared. Diamond was 3 and Tionda was 10 when they went missing from their Bronzeville apartment. Their family is holding a vigil right now at the Dan Ryan Forest Woods. They still hold out hope that someone will come forward with information on what happened to the girls.
But sustained attention did not return. There were no breakthroughs to reignite national focus. This is not unusual. Media attention often follows novelty and resolution. Cases without either tend to fade, even when the underlying question remains urgent. Diamond's disappearance did not produce new images, new suspects, or new timelines. And without those elements, the story slowly slips from public memory. The danger of that fade is not just forgetfulness, it is invisibility. In later years, the case found a different kind of life online. Creators summarized the known facts. Podcasts revisited timelines. Videos attempted to keep the story circulating. Some of this attention was careful and respectful. Some blurred the lines between reporting and speculation. This digital afterlife kept Diamond's name visible, but it also introduced risks. When information is scarce, repetition can harden assumptions. Unverified details can begin to sound established simply because they are repeated. This is why restraint matters. Diamond's story does not need embellishment to be compelling. Its power lies in simplicity and in questions that remain unanswered. Years after the disappearance, a woman publicly claimed to be Diamond Bradley. The claim spread quickly, fueled by hope rather than confirmation. Authorities reviewed the information. It was not substantiated. No identity was confirmed. No status changed. The significance of this moment lies not in the claim itself, but in what it reveals about unresolved disappearances. When answers never arrive, people search for them wherever they appear. Hope can sustain families, but evidence is what resolves cases. Acknowledging this moment without centering it protects both truths. Today, Diamond Yvette Bradley remains missing. So does her sister. The case is still open. Their names remain in official databases. Age-progressed images continue to circulate, but there are no confirmed sightings. No verified communications, no resolutions. Diamond would now be an adult. That fact alone reframes the case, transforming a missing child investigation into a long-term unresolved disappearance. Time has changed everything except the absence. Diamond Bradley was 3 years old. She was not defined by mystery. She was defined by dependence on her family, on her sister, on the adults and systems meant to protect her. She deserved safety. She deserved care. She deserved the chance to grow. Remembering Diamond is not about solving a puzzle at any cost. It's about refusing to let her disappearance be reduced to speculation or forgotten entirely. This case does not offer neat answers. It offers a responsibility to tell the story without invention, to acknowledge gaps without filling them falsely, to keep the focus where it belongs, on a child whose life mattered. This is the Ebony Cases on the Icy Bridge Files. Thank you for remembering with me. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and always remember, every story deserves to be told, and every life deserves to be remembered.